The intercept had been sitting in Decryption Bay 4 for 11 days when Ren Callister walked in, picked up the printout from senior analyst Devon's desk and said, "Why is this still here?" Devon's mandible plates clicked in the pattern that meant professional embarrassment. The Sorathi cryptanalyst had spent the better part of those 11 days running the intercept through every cipher-breaking protocol the Coalition's Signals Intelligence Directorate possessed, and his desk was buried under the debris of the attempt frequency spread analyses, entropy charts, key space exhaustion reports, each one stamped with the same result: no viable decryption pathway identified. 11 days. 14 analysts on rotation. 309 separate algorithmic approaches. The same answer every time. "It resists classification," Devon said. "The signal structure is consistent with encrypted traffic, but no known cipher matches. We have exhausted all standard and non-standard methodologies." Analyst Trevek requested permission to apply experimental quantum phase decomposition yesterday, and that failed as well. Callister held the printout at arm's length and tilted his head. The printout was a visual rendering of the intercepted signal, a dense block of oscillating waveforms captured from a transmission the long-range relay station at Outpost Kethais had flagged 11 days prior. The signal had been broadcasting on a frequency the Coalition used exclusively for military command traffic, which meant it was either hostile or a malfunction. And the fact that nobody could determine which had driven 3 separate escalation requests, 2 formal complaints from the monitoring division, and 1 memorandum from Admiral Kesherin asking, in language that barely qualified as diplomatic, why Bay 4 still could not tell him what was on his military frequency. "Who flagged this originally?" Callister asked. "Automated intercept at Kethais. The signal was transmitting on military command band Gamma 7, no origin point identified, no vessel transponder, no recognized encoding header, no handshake protocol, no termination sequence. It simply broadcasts continuously, without interruption for 11 days and 4 hours. And you've been trying to decrypt it the entire time." Devon's secondary mandible clicked once, reluctant confirmation. "Correct." Callister set the printout on the desk, smoothed it flat with both palms and stared at it. Not reading, not analyzing. The distinction mattered, though Devon did not yet understand why. Callister's eyes moved in patterns no Sorathi had ever been able to model. Quick lateral sweeps, then vertical scans, then a slow drift from the center outward, as if the data were terrain and the human was looking for the path through it rather than the meaning inside it. As if meaning and path were different things. Station Director Orville watched through the observation window above Bay 4 with the careful attention she reserved for situations that had stopped following protocol. She had inherited Callister's contract from her predecessor 7 months ago. The intelligence report said he was the finest pattern recognition specialist humanity had produced in a generation. The behavioral assessment said he was volatile under sustained cognitive load, that his ability to perceive structures in complex data came with a proportional risk of cognitive overreach, of following patterns deeper than a human mind could safely travel. Both assessments were accurate, and neither had told her what to do about either. Callister picked up a marking stylus and drew a single line across the printout. Diagonal from upper left to lower right, cutting through the densest cluster of waveform peaks. "What are you doing?" Devon asked. "Looking at it wrong." "I do not understand that statement." Callister drew a second line, perpendicular to the first, then a third, offset by 30 degrees, a fourth, a fifth. Within 2 minutes, he had covered the printout in a grid of intersecting lines that bore no relationship to any recognized analytical framework. Devon watched with mandible plates locked forward and secondary eyelids half-drawn, the Sorathi expression for observing a colleague depart from professional methodology. "Specialist Callister, those markings do not correspond to any frequency separation protocol in the Directorate's library." "That's the idea." Your protocols are designed to separate signal from noise. I'm looking for something different. What? I'll know when I find it. Callister put the stylus down. He placed both index fingers on two of the intersections his grid had created and looked at Devon with an expression that used, by Devon's count, at least 14 of the human's 43 facial muscles simultaneously, an arrangement the Sorathi facial expression database classified as unresolvable. These 2 points, Callister said. What do you see? Devon leaned forward. At the 2 intersection points Callister's fingers marked, the waveform data showed identical patterns, not similar, identical. The same oscillation amplitude, the same frequency spread, the same harmonic structure, matching down to the 7th decimal of the noise floor. Coincidence, Devon said carefully. In a dataset of this density, repetitive waveform segments are statistically expected. The probability of at least 2 matching micropatterns. Find the third one. Devon found it in 4 seconds. A third identical pattern precisely positioned at the next grid intersection Callister's lines predicted. His secondary mandible twitched. He found a fourth, 3 intersections further. A fifth, 6 intersections beyond that, at the exact spacing the grid predicted. His mandible plates went still. That is not coincidence, Devon said. The professional register had entered his voice, the tone reserved for findings that would be logged and timestamped and would appear in someone's career review. No, it's structure, but not encrypted structure. Look at the spacing between repetitions. Devon looked. The identical waveform patterns appeared at regular intervals across the printout, spaced with mathematical precision, each one aligned to the grid Callister had drawn freehand in under 2 minutes. Not hidden, not obscured by ciphertext overhead, not buried under encryption artifacts or masked by padding. Sitting in the open data, visible to anyone who drew the right lines through it, which nobody in Bay 4 had done in 11 days because nobody drew lines that weren't in the protocol library. The intervals are consistent, Devon said, his voice flattening. They form a repeating grid with a periodicity of 17.392 standard frequency units. Right, and the waveform patterns at each intersection aren't noise, they're characters. Senior analyst Trevek, 2 stations away, looked up. Junior analyst Moreth stopped mid-keystroke. Analyst Kasev pulled her auditory membrane off her secondary work and turned. The word characters had detonated silently across the room. Characters, Devon repeated. Callister picked up the printout and held it so the overhead daylight spectrum panels shone through the paper. The grid he'd drawn cast thin shadows across the waveform data, and in those shadows something emerged that had been there for 11 days, sitting in the open, patient, undisturbed, waiting for someone to see it. Not a cipher, not a code. A pattern of repeating identical segments, evenly spaced, openly placed, forming a structure that looked, if you drew the right lines, if you knew to draw lines at all, like language. It's plaintext, Callister said, written in a transmission format nobody here has seen before, using a structural grammar based on spatial relationships instead of sequential characters. The repeating patterns are letters. The geometric spacing between them is syntax, and none of it is encrypted. None of it is hidden. Every piece of this signal has been in the open for 11 days, and nobody read it because everybody was trying to decrypt something that was never encrypted in the first place. The words landed in Bay 4 like a hull breach, not with noise, but with a pressure change that made every occupant of the room adjust their equilibrium. Director Orville's voice came through the observation window intercom. Calm, precise, the calm of a person deciding whether what she was hearing was insight or delusion. Specialist Callister, if that signal is plaintext, explain why every automated classification system in this directorate flagged it as encrypted. Because your classification systems define encrypted as structure we don't recognize. This structure is real, It's consistent. It's openly arranged with mathematical precision, but it's not sequential, it's spatial. Your system's read signals left to right, first frequency to last, beginning to end. This signal is written in all directions simultaneously. The meaning isn't in the sequence, it's in the geometry. Your algorithms looked at it, couldn't read it left to right, and concluded it must be hiding something. It's not hiding anything, it's displaying everything, in a format your tools weren't built to see. 7 seconds of Sorathi silence, long enough for every analyst in Bay 4 to recalibrate their assumptions about the last 11 days. You are saying, Orville said, each word placed separately, that the coalition's entire signals intelligence apparatus has been attempting to break a code that does not exist. For 11 days, on a military priority flag, with 3 formal escalation requests and a memorandum from Admiral Kesherin. Yes. Show me. Callister cleared Devon's desk. He took 4 clean printouts of the raw intercept data, spread them edge to edge, and began drawing. Not lines this time. Circles. He marked every identical waveform segment with a tight blue circle, then connected the circles with arcs that displayed their spatial relationships, distance, angle, harmonic resonance between adjacent characters. The arcs formed a web, the web formed a shape. The shape had bilateral symmetry, deliberate asymmetry in its lower left quadrant, and the quality that Callister called depth layers of meaning, stacked on each other like transparencies on a light table, each layer visible through the ones above, each coherent on its own, all composing something larger when viewed together. There, he said, stepping back, that's the first word. Trevek had left her station and was standing behind Devon. Dorsal ridge fully extended the Sorathi indicator for a fundamental assumption being dismantled, while the expert watched. One word, she said. One word. It occupies the first 17.392 frequency units. The next word begins at the next grid marker. The entire signal is a message, written in spatial plaintext, using identical waveform segments as characters and their geometric relationships as grammar. How many words? Orville asked. Callister's jaw worked rapid mental calculation. Based on the grid periodicity and the signal's total broadcast length, approximately 340 words. You are telling me there is a 340-word message that has been sitting on my senior analyst's desk for 11 days, unread, on a military command frequency, broadcasting continuously from an unidentified source, in a language nobody recognized because everyone assumed it was trying to hide. Orville's next words carried the cadence of a decision crystallizing. Can you translate it? Not yet. I've identified the structure, not the content, but I can already tell you something about whoever wrote it. Callister pointed to the web of arcs. The grammar is spatial. That means the writer thinks in spatial relationships, processes information simultaneously, not sequentially, the way an architect reads a blueprint rather than a novel, and the characters they chose are deliberately simple, highest possible redundancy, clearest possible geometry. This message was not designed to be hard to read. It was designed to be impossible to misread. Someone spent enormous effort ensuring that once we stopped trying to crack it and started trying to read it, we would understand it perfectly. That implies benign intent, Trevek said. No. That implies the content is important enough to eliminate every possible misinterpretation. Important messages can be threats, but the care here, he traced one of the arcs, 9 decimal places of precision on every geometric relationship, every character rendered identically across every repetition. Whoever wrote this was not being careful. They were being meticulous, the way a surgeon is meticulous, the way someone is meticulous when lives depend on being understood correctly. Devon's mandibles clicked in a pattern Callister hadn't heard before. He later asked Trevek what it meant. Professional shame, she told him. The specific form reserved for an expert who had failed to recognize something squarely within his field. Director Orville descended from the observation level. She entered Bay 4 through the main corridor, passing the security checkpoint, logging her presence. Everything from this point was officially recorded. She studied the printout, the circles, the arcs, the web of spatial relationships drawn in 7 minutes by a human from a signal her 14-analyst team had spent 11 days failing to break. "How long to translate?" she asked. "Full manual translation, character identification, geometric mapping, grammar construction from first principles 48 hours. Maybe 36 if the grammar has exploitable regularities." "You have 12. "Why 12? "Because in 12 hours, this signal will have been broadcasting on a coalition military command frequency for 12 full days. Treaty obligations require classification of any unidentified military band transmission within that window. If we cannot provide a classification, hostile, benign, or natural phenomenon, standing protocol treats it as hostile and authorizes a suppression fleet to the estimated origin point." "You're going to send a fleet to suppress a letter." "I'm going to follow the treaty my government signed unless you give me a reason not to. 12 hours, specialist. Give me a reason." Callister pulled the printouts off Devon's desk, collected his tools, and walked toward the secondary analysis room at the back of Bay 4. He stopped in the doorway. "I need every piece of raw data from the Kethai's intercept. Every frequency, every timestamp, every noise artifact your filters removed. The original signal exactly as it arrived, before anyone touched it." Devon hesitated. "The unprocessed data includes significant background interference, relay harmonics, solar bleed, equipment signatures." "I know what noise is. Send me everything." The secondary analysis room was 4 meters square, single workstation, a display surface covering the east wall. He set the lights to full daylight spectrum, a clean, even, shadowless white that turned the room into a cube of bright clarity. He pinned the 4 printouts to the north wall, pulled the raw signal onto the display surface, and began. The first 2 hours were alphabet work. He identified the repeating waveform segments, the characters of the spatial language, and cataloged them. 41 unique characters. He assigned each a numeric label, not because numbers carried meaning in the spatial grammar, but because his cognition needed handles to grip while it worked in a space that had no ground. The characters were not symbols in any traditional sense. They were waveform shapes, specific oscillation patterns with specific harmonic signatures. What made them characters was their repetition. Each appeared multiple times across the signal, in different spatial positions, creating different geometric relationships with neighbors, the same way the letter A creates different meanings depending on the words surrounding it, except these words were geometries. By hour 2 he had the complete set, 41 characters, 41 waveform shapes, no sequential order, no phonetic equivalence. No Rosetta Stone, pure geometry. He wrote the catalog on the north wall in blue marker next to the printouts, stepped back, stared. Devon's voice came through the intercom. "Status update for Director Orville. 2 hours in, alphabet complete, 41 characters, beginning grammar analysis." 41 characters. The Sorathi primary script uses 38. The Raveshi use 44. The Kelly's binary combinative system generates 42 functional graphemes. Is the number coincidental? Intentional. They calibrated the character set to match the complexity range of the most commonly used coalition languages. They weren't trying to impress us. They were trying to be accessible. 5 seconds of Sorathi silence. "I will relay your status." Callister returned to the display surface. He drew the grid over the raw signal, the diagonal intersection, scaled to the periodicity of 17.392 frequency units. At each intersection, a character waited. The geometric relationships between characters, distance, angle, harmonic resonance, formed the grammar. He mapped the first word carefully, measuring every relationship. The second word, the third, the fourth. At the fifth word, his stylus stopped. Something was wrong, not wrong in the sense of error, wrong in the sense of depth. The geometric relationships between characters were more complex than a simple grammar required. There were layers. The relationship between character 7 and character 19 in word 3 wasn't purely spatial, it carried a harmonic component, a resonance that shifted the meaning depending on the direction of measurement. Measured from 7 to 19, the resonance indicated one thing. Measured from 19 to 7, something different. The grammar was directional, and it was directional in both directions simultaneously. Bidirectional grammar, he muttered, writing it on the wall in red. Every word reads differently depending on starting point, forward and backward, both valid. He sat back. His hands were trembling, not fatigue, but the specific vibration that lived in the space between comprehension and its edge. When the pattern was almost visible, and the mind was reaching for it with everything it had, and the gap between almost and there felt like a cliff edge narrowing under his feet. He closed his eyes. 3 minutes, not thinking, not calculating, listening. The signal's raw waveform played through the room's audio system on a low loop. He'd set it running when he entered, and it filled the space with a dense, layered hum that sounded to human ears like an orchestra tuning before a performance. Every instrument present. No melody yet, pure potential waiting for someone to hear the shape. When he opened his eyes, he knew. It's not bidirectional, he said to the empty room. It's simultaneous. Every word means both things at the same time. The spatial grammar carries two messages in the same structure, one for readers who process left to right, one for readers who process right to left. Both meanings valid, both intended, both delivered in the same characters. He stood. His hands moved fast, drawing arcs in two colors, red for the forward reading, green for the reverse. The dual structure emerged like a face rising from water. Two messages, interlocked, sharing characters, sharing geometry, each coherent, each complete, occupying the same space without contradiction. He translated the first word forward, greeting. He translated the first word backward, warning. Callister stood in the bright room with one hand on the display surface and laughed. Not humor. The involuntary sound of a mind running at full capacity that had just discovered the problem was twice as large as it appeared. Greeting and warning, the same word, simultaneously. The sender was saying hello and raising an alarm in the same breath, and the genius of the spatial grammar was that both meanings were true, both intended, and neither invalidated the other. The grammar didn't merely permit dual meaning, it required it. Every word was designed to carry both readings the way a chord carries both notes. He keyed the intercom. Devon. Yes. The message is dual text. Two simultaneous readings sharing the same character set. Forward reading, a greeting. Reverse reading, a warning. Both valid, both intended, both part of the same communication. 4 seconds of silence. That is not linguistically possible, Devon said. In sequential grammar, no. In spatial grammar, where meaning is encoded in geometric relationships that operate in all directions simultaneously, yes. It's not an edge case. It's the core design. The sender chose this format because they had two things to say that could not be separated. What is the warning about? One word translated, 339 remaining. And I have, he checked the clock, 8 hours and 14 minutes, unless Orville adjusted the deadline again. 7 hours and 42 minutes. The suppression fleet is staging earlier than originally scheduled. 7 hours and 42 minutes. 339 dual-meaning words, from a grammar he was constructing in real time, in a language no one in the coalition had ever heard of. The clock was not metaphorical. Somewhere in fleet space, warships were warming their engines to go destroy the source of a message that was trying to help them. Understood. He worked. The first 30 words took 90 minutes. Each word required mapping the forward and reverse geometric relationships simultaneously, holding both meanings in his mind at once, and the cognitive load was unlike anything he had trained for. Sequential translation was like walking a path one step, then the next. Simultaneous spatial translation was like standing at the center of a room and reading every wall at the same time. Every word he translated confirmed both readings and added context that modified the words before it. The message was not linear. It was architectural. Each new word changed the meaning of the structure it sat inside, the way a new beam changed the weight distribution of an entire building. By word 40, the greeting's tone had emerged. Formal, patient, considered. The kind of language used by someone who had written this sentence many times before to many different recipients and had learned through long experience exactly how to phrase an introduction to a species that did not yet know you existed. By word 60, the warning's tone had crystallized. Not panicked, not urgent in the way a distress call was urgent. Urgent in the way a doctor was urgent when explaining a diagnosis to a patient who did not yet understand that the diagnosis was terminal. Calm, clear, precise, and utterly serious. The intercom chimed at the 2-hour mark. Devon's voice. Director Orville requests a progress assessment. 60 words translated, both readings holding consistent. The greeting is introducing a species. The warning is describing a threat. 60 words in 2 hours. At that rate, you will need approximately 11 additional hours. You have 5 hours and 42 minutes. Callister did not respond. The mathematics were not helpful. He returned to the display surface. At word 89, the greeting named the sender. The spatial character that served as their identifier was complex, a nested geometry of 4 concentric shapes, each one modified by its orientation relative to the others. He spent 14 minutes on that single character and translated it as a proper noun, tersen. It carried connotations he could feel but not fully render. The geometry suggested patience, depth, listening, a quality of existing that was more like being present everywhere at once than being located in one place. At word 93, the warning named the threat. The character was simpler but heavier, a single dense knot of harmonic relationships that resisted translation into any word Callister knew. He settled on pattern, but the spatial grammar added overtones that the English word could not carry, alive and hungry and patient and old. Very old, older than the sender, older possibly than the act of communication itself, something that existed before language and consumed it wherever language appeared. Devon's voice came again at the 4-hour mark. 3 hours and 42 minutes remaining. Translation progress. 112 words. Accelerating. The grammar has regularities I'm starting to internalize. Accelerating. The first 60 took 2 hours. The last 52 took 1 hour and 40 minutes. The grammar becomes easier to read the deeper you go. The sender designed it to teach itself to the reader. Early words establish patterns. Later words use those patterns as shorthand. By word 200, I'll be reading at conversational speed. That is an extraordinary design feature. That's the point, Devon. They designed this message for someone who had never seen their language. They built a curriculum into it. The message teaches you how to read it while you're reading it. Silence, then very quietly, that is beautiful. Yes, Callister said, it is. He worked faster. The self-teaching property of the grammar accelerated his translation rate exactly as he had predicted. By word 150, the geometry felt natural. By word 180, he was reading, not translating the spatial relationships resolving into meaning the way a face resolved from a blur when you adjusted focus. The forward message, the greeting, was measured and ancient. A species called the tersen, a single entity speaking on behalf of a collective. The grammar distinguished between the one and the many with a precision that made Callister's breath catch. The tercen did not have a word for individual because they were not individuals. They were facets of a collective awareness, each facet capable of independent thought but fundamentally connected to every other facet, the way notes in a chord were connected to the chord. The speaker was not separate from the tercen. The speaker was the part of the tercen that had learned to speak in geometries small enough for sequential minds to read. The greeting described a location. Spatial geometric coordinates that Callister, after 40 minutes of cross-referencing against the Coalition's navigational database, recognized as stellar positions. The coordinates pointed to Sector 7741 Kesh, a gas cloud the Coalition had surveyed 3 years ago and classified as barren, navigationally hazardous, commercially worthless. The reverse message, the warning, carried urgency, compressed into the highest precision the grammar could achieve. It described a threat approaching the Coalition's core systems from a vector that current sensor networks did not cover. Not a fleet, not a weapon, a phenomenon. The spatial grammar's character for it vibrated with overtones Callister could feel even through translation, alive and hungry and patient and very, very old. A self-propagating signal pattern that consumed communication networks the way fire consumed dry brush. It ate relay architecture. It ate encrypted channels. It ate anything that processed information sequentially, because the pattern was itself sequential, and once it entered a sequential system, it replaced the system's native operations with copies of itself, rewriting the host from the inside out. The warning specified, "It has already entered your network." The greeting specified, "We sent this message because we saw it enter." Both statements occupied the same characters. Both were true. The sender had watched the threat begin its work, and had immediately composed this message, greeting, warning, and something else Callister could not yet see, and transmitted it on the frequency most likely to reach someone who could understand. The warning, "It is coming." The greeting, "We can help." Same characters, both true. At hour 4, with the deadline grinding closer, Callister hit the wall. He was translating word 197 when the dual grammar multiplied. A third reading direction emerged diagonal, cutting across his grid at 43 degrees, creating new intersections, new geometric relationships, and new meanings he had not accounted for. The signal wasn't carrying 2 messages. It was carrying 3. He pressed both hands flat against the display surface, forehead inches from the wall, and breathed in the controlled 4-count rhythm he used when his mind was running too hot. The third direction added a third message to the dual text, and every new angle he tested revealed the potential for more. The characters were not just words. They were nodes in a geometric lattice that could be read from any angle and would yield coherent meaning from each one. "Come on," he whispered. "Come on, show me the shape." He stepped back, all the way to the opposite wall, as far from the display surface as the small room allowed. He looked at the entire surface at once, not focusing on any single word or character, taking in the whole structure the way he'd taken in the printout when he first picked it up. Absorbing, not analyzing. Letting the pattern emerge, because you could not force a pattern to appear any more than you could force a face to appear in a cloud. You could only relax your grip on what you expected to see, and let what was actually there find you. It found him. The 3 messages were not separate contents sharing characters. They were facets of a single structure, 3 sides of a triangular geometry. The message was not 3 things. It was one thing that could only be understood from 3 perspectives simultaneously, the way a crystal could only be understood by looking at it from 3 angles. Greeting, warning, instruction. Hello, danger, here is how to survive. All one communication, all one breath. The third message, the diagonal reading, was an instruction manual. Engineering specifications for building a communication device capable of receiving spatial grammar transmissions directly. A device that did not process sequentially. a device the self-propagating pattern could not eat because it had no sequence to infect. Callister sat on the floor, head in his hands, pulse pounding. Vision carrying the sharp-edged crystalline clarity that came with sustained cognitive overload, surfaces looking like cut glass, sounds separating into individual frequencies, the way light separated through a prism. He was at the edge, the place where pattern recognition became pattern immersion, where the boundary between analyst and subject dissolved, and the temptation was to follow the pattern all the way down and never come back to the room. He had been here before, other signals, other nights, the pattern opening up, inviting him in, offering a depth that felt like comprehension but was actually consumption. The beautiful mind's beautiful trap. The pattern was always more interesting than the person looking at it, and if you followed it far enough you forgot there was a person at all. He counted to 10, forced his breathing into rhythm, stood up, went back to work. The intercom chimed. Specialist Callister, Orville's voice. You have 3 hours and 41 minutes. I know. Your biometric feed shows elevated heart rate, cortisol spike, and EEG anomalies. Our medical team has flagged as consistent with acute cognitive overextension. I'm fine. Your definition of fine and the medical definition are diverging. Then they'll converge when I'm finished. I also need the complete navigational survey data for Sector 7741 cache. The gas cloud your people classified as barren 3 years ago. Why? Because the species that sent this message lives there, and they didn't just send a greeting and a warning. They sent a survival manual, instructions for building technology that could save your entire communication network from something that's already inside it. 3 messages, 1 transmission, plaintext, 11 days on Devon's desk. 8 minutes later, the navigational data arrived. Callister spread it across the display wall alongside his translation and began mapping the Tersen's coordinates against coalition star charts. The gas cloud in Sector 7741 cache was not barren. The survey 3 years ago had classified it as barren because the sensors processed sequentially, and the readings from the cloud were noise-dense, chaotic, apparently structureless interference that matched no recognized pattern. Noise was what you filtered out, what you discarded, what you threw away to get to the real data underneath. Callister drew the grid over the survey data. Same periodicity, same diagonal intersections, same spatial structure. The gas cloud was not noise. The gas cloud was a message. The same spatial grammar plaintext, written in electromagnetic emissions across a region of space 12 light hours wide. The Tersen had not merely transmitted a signal. They had written a message across the surface of their own territory in letters 12 light hours tall, visible to anyone who looked at them correctly. And the coalition's survey team had stared directly at this message, recorded every photon of it, and filed it under barren. Because the message was the thing their instruments were trained to throw away. Devon. Yes. The survey data from 7741 cache, 3 years ago. Run it through the spatial grid I've been using. Same periodicity, same intersections. Send the results to analyst Trevek for verification. 22 minutes. Trevek reported. Her voice carried a frequency Callister had never heard from a Sorathi, a harmonic somewhere between awe and a fear that had passed through panic into absolute stillness. Confirmed, she said. The electromagnetic emissions from the 7741 cache gas cloud contain structured spatial grammar content consistent with the intercepted signal, significantly longer, several orders of magnitude longer. How much longer? Trevek paused. When she spoke, each word landed individually. If the periodicity holds across the full volume of the cloud, approximately 400 million words. Callister leaned against the workstation. 400 million words, written in plaintext, across a gas cloud 12 light towers wide. An entire library, an entire civilization's accumulated knowledge, history, voice, inscribed in the electromagnetic spectrum of their own territory. Open, readable, patient. And the coalition had surveyed it, cataloged it, and filed it under worthless. Because nobody had drawn the right lines. He went back to the intercept. 2 hours and 11 minutes on the clock. The spatial grammar was intuitive now. The third reading direction, the diagonal, was harder than the other two because the engineering specifications it carried were dense, technical, and used characters Callister had to infer from context rather than translate directly. Some of them were measurement units. Some were material properties. Some were concepts that had no human equivalent, but that he could sense the shape of states of matter that sequential physics did not describe, signal processing architectures that did not use time as a dimension. He translated the instruction manual word by painful word, while simultaneously maintaining the forward greeting and reverse warning in his working memory, because each new word in any of the 3 readings modified the meanings of words in the other 2. The message was not 3 parallel texts. It was one holographic text that could only be understood when all 3 readings were held simultaneously. The way a 3-dimensional object could only be understood when you stopped looking at its shadow and picked it up. At word 240, Trevik's voice came through the intercom. Controlled, barely. Specialist Callister. The spatial grid analysis of the 7,740 cache survey data has revealed an additional structure we did not initially detect. The 400 million word content in the gas cloud appears to be organized into discrete sections. At least one section is a complete engineering library. Schematics, materials science, fabrication methods. It is consistent with the instruction manual content in the intercepted signal, but vastly more detailed. Callister looked up. They put the summary in the signal and the full documentation in the cloud. Yes, the intercept is a cover letter. The gas cloud is the attached technical archive. 400 million words of technical documentation. At minimum, we have only analyzed 0.7% of the cloud's emissions. The full content may be significantly larger. Callister felt the pattern shift in his mind, not a change in the data, a change in comprehension. The Tersen had not sent a message. They had built a library. They had inscribed it on the surface of their own territory, in plaintext, in a language designed to teach itself to the reader. They had attached a cover letter to the coalition's military frequency explaining what the library contained and why it mattered. And then they had waited. For how long, Callister could not yet know. But the grammar's duration character, the heaviest word in the Tersen's entire language, the geometric shape with the deepest embedding, the one that carried more relational weight than any other symbol in the alphabet, appeared in the greeting's description of how long they had been waiting. And the weight of that character pressed on Callister's mind like a stone on his chest. However long it was long enough that the Tersen had invented a word for it, that their language considered the most significant concept expressible in their grammar. He translated faster. Word 260, word 280, the 3 readings converging toward their conclusions, each one adding final details that sharpened the others. The greeting named the 19 species the Tersen had watched go silent not by name but by the duration character's modifiers, each modifier indicating another civilization the pattern had consumed. 19 modifiers, 19 silences, each one carrying a weight that Callister could feel in the geometry itself, a grief encoded not in sentiment but in structure, the way a building's foundation carried the weight of everything above it without ever being seen. The greeting completed. We are the Tersen. We have been here for a long time. We communicate in spatial grammar because sequential communication is vulnerable to the pattern. We sent this message because your relay network passes through our territory, and we have watched you build it for 60 years, and we know the pattern is coming, and we would like you to survive. The warning completed. The pattern entered your outer relay network 14 days ago. It propagates through sequential systems at a rate proportional to network density. At current density, it will reach your core systems in 31 days. Once it reaches core systems, it will replace your communication infrastructure with copies of itself. You will lose the ability to transmit, receive, and process information. You will go silent. We have watched 19 species go silent. The instruction manual completed. Here is how to build a receiver that processes spatial grammar. It does not use sequential architecture. The pattern cannot consume it. Build many. Replace your relay network before the 31 days expire. We will help. Come to the coordinates. Bring someone who reads patterns, not codes. The last 4 words of the instruction manual, someone who reads patterns, not codes, were, in the spatial grammar, a single compound character. A character that contained, in its geometric relationships, the description of a cognitive type. A mind that perceives structure not by breaking it into components, but by experiencing it whole. A mind that listened before it analyzed. A mind that assumed intent before concealment. Callister stared at that final character for 60 seconds. Then he set down his stylus, pressed his palms flat on the desk, and breathed. The character was a description, and the description, rendered into the imperfect sequential language of English, was a description of what he did. Not who he was, what he did, the way he approached a signal, the orientation he carried. The Tersen had sent a message designed to be received by a specific kind of mind, not a specific person, a specific cognitive orientation. And they had written the message in a format that only that kind of mind would recognize as readable, because anyone else would try to decrypt it. 11 days of proof that the design worked exactly as intended. Callister finished the full translation, with 37 minutes remaining. He walked out of the analysis room. Bay 4 had filled. Director Orville stood behind Devon's station, facial plates locked in the expression Sorathi officers wore when they were committing details to permanent record. Devon at his station. Trevik beside him. Admiral Kesherin near the entrance, full dress uniform, flanked by 4 tactical officers and 2 civilians who carried themselves like people accustomed to making decisions about civilizations rather than stations. Callister placed the translation on Devon's desk. 3 messages, interlocked, color-coded, red, green, blue. He placed the 7,740 Wunkesh survey overlay beside it. He placed the Tersen's coordinates at the center. Then he looked at Director Orville and said the sentence that Devon would later quote in his official report, that Trevik would call the most important words spoken in Bay 4 in 60 years. Stop decrypting it. It has never been a code. It is a letter from a species that has been waiting for us to read it, and they are telling us that we have 31 days to rebuild our entire communication infrastructure before something eats it. Orville read the translation, greeting first, warning, instruction manual. Her facial plates cycled through an expression sequence Callister had never seen. Surprise, comprehension, cold focus, and something at the end that had no Sorathi name he knew but that looked, on a human face, like gratitude. You translated 3 simultaneous messages from an unknown spatial grammar in 11 hours. 7 hours of translation, 4 hours of alphabet work. The grammar did most of the heavy lifting. Once I stopped fighting it and started reading with it, the meanings were clear. Whoever designed this wanted it to be understood. How did you know? She asked. How did you see what 14 analysts and 309 algorithms could not? The answer was always the same, and it was always insufficient because the answer was not a method. It was an orientation. I stopped trying to break it, he said. Everything in this bay is built to crack signals open, force them apart, Find hidden meaning through computational aggression. That works brilliantly when meaning is hidden. It fails completely when meaning is displayed and the reader's tools are designed to ignore anything that doesn't resist. He tapped the printout. This signal never hid. The characters are simple. The grammar is precise. Everything is in the open. The sender wrote the clearest, most careful, most redundant message they could compose, and we spent 11 days trying to crack it because nobody could imagine that something we didn't understand wasn't trying to hide from us. Kesharin stepped forward. The warning describes a self-propagating pattern already inside our relay network. 14 days. According to the Tersen. Verify it. Callister looked at Devon. Spatial grid analysis. Outer relay traffic logs. Past 14 days. Same periodicity. Devon ran it. 19 minutes. When the results appeared, his mandible plates went motionless. The stillness of a professional watching the floor open beneath his career. Non-random periodicity confirmed in the noise floor of outer relay nodes 7 through 31, he said. Onset, 14 days ago. Consistent with a self-replicating signal structure propagating through sequential architecture. It is in our network. The room stopped breathing. 17 days remaining, Callister said. The Tersen calibrated every other element of this message to 9 decimal places. I would not bet against their arithmetic. Kesharin stared at the instruction manual. Can we build this? Yes, the specifications are complete, but the design is fundamentally unlike anything Coalition engineers have seen. It processes spatially, not sequentially. Every instinct your engineers have will fight it. They will want to add sequential processing layers because that's what they know, and every sequential layer they add is a surface the pattern can infect. The design has to be built exactly as specified, or it becomes the thing it was meant to protect against. And the Tersen. 12 light hours away, inside a library 400 million words long. Waiting for someone to come and read it. Waiting, according to the greeting's duration character, the deepest embedded, heaviest word in their entire grammar, for longer than the Coalition has existed. Possibly longer than any species in this room has had spaceflight. How many species have they watched go silent? Orville asked. Her voice was the quietest Callister had ever heard from a Sorathi station director. 19. The greeting carries 19 duration modifiers, each one marking a civilization the pattern consumed. 19 species that built sequential communication networks that encrypted their traffic, that processed data left to right, beginning to end, and that the pattern ate from the inside out. The Tersen watched each one go dark. And after each silence, they updated their library, added more documentation, made the instructions clearer, simplified the cover letter, calibrated the grammar to be more self-teaching. 19 iterations of a message that nobody read. Until today, Trevik said from her station, the words were barely audible. Until today. The silence lasted 11 seconds. Callister counted. 11 days of assumed encryption. 14 days of undetected infiltration. 19 civilizations already consumed. And behind it all, a species that had been sitting in a cloud of plaintext, watching civilization after civilization build sequential networks, watching the pattern come for them, watching them go silent, and writing endlessly, meticulously, in the clearest language they could compose the instructions for survival, revising the manual after each failure, making it simpler, making it more patient, making the grammar more self-teaching so that the 20th species might succeed where the previous 19 had not, posting the cure on their front door, in letters 12 light hours wide, and waiting for someone to stop trying to break it down and simply read it. My recommendation, Callister said. Orville nodded. Send a research vessel to 7740 Wunkesh, not a warship. Best engineers, best linguists. Someone who can think spatially, not sequentially. The Tersen built the most patient document in the history of any species any of us have ever met. They want us to succeed. They have wanted us to succeed since before we existed. And the pattern, Kesherin said, 17 days. Start building. The specs are clear and your engineers will hate every line because the design doesn't process the way they were trained to think. But it works. It works because it's spatial and the pattern can only eat sequential systems. This device doesn't have a sequence. It has a geometry. And shut down relay nodes 7 through 31 immediately. The pattern is using them as highways. Cutting those nodes doesn't lose you coverage. It cuts the road. Kesherin looked at Orville. Orville looked at the 3 interlocked messages on the desk. One more thing, Callister said. The mission team include a musician, specifically someone trained in polyphonic composition. A musician. The Tersen spatial grammar has structural properties identical to polyphonic music. Multiple independent voices occupying the same space, each complete, all forming a larger whole when perceived together. A musician reads a symphony score the way the Tersen read language, every voice simultaneously, all directions, all layers. That is the cognitive skill we need for what comes next. Orville issued 7 orders in 4 minutes. Nodes shut down, research vessel tasked, engineering team formed. Diplomatic channels opened with 3 station delegations. Communication grid set to restricted mode. Callister was assigned to the research vessel. A linguist with musical training was being located. Devon spoke last, quietly from his station, where he had sat for 11 days running algorithms against a message that had been open the whole time. Specialist Callister, when you first picked up the printout, you said, "Why is this still here?" As if you already knew. Callister looked at the Sorathi. Devon's mandible plates were still not shame now, but the focused attention of an expert trying to understand a method that operated on different assumptions from his own. I didn't know, but the signal was too clean. Encrypted data carries encoding noise padding, initialization vectors, cipherblock residue, the artifacts that come from the encryption process itself. This signal had none. It was pure structure, and pure structure doesn't hide. It displays. The same way a building doesn't hide its architecture, you look at a building and see the structure because the structure is the point. He set his stylus on the desk. The most dangerous assumption in this work is that complexity equals concealment. Sometimes complexity is just someone saying something complicated as clearly as they can. The Tersen had 3 things to tell us, all urgent, all true. They composed them in the most careful geometry they knew, and they sent them in plaintext because plaintext is what you use when the message matters more than the secrecy. We nearly sent a suppression fleet to destroy someone who was trying to save us. He walked toward the corridor. 11 days of plaintext, 17 days of countdown, 400 million words in a cloud of light, and a species that had been writing the survival manual for every civilization in their reach of space patiently, precisely, in the open for longer than anyone in the room could measure. Devon's official report, filed 6 hours after the research vessel departed with Callister aboard, ran 112 pages of technical analysis, verification logs, and methodology review. Director Orville authorized the personal addendum that Devon appended to the final section. The addendum was not required by Directorate reporting standards. Devon wrote it because he believed, for the first time in his career, that the most important information he could contribute was not technical. In 60 years of Sorathi signals intelligence, this directorate built the most advanced computational cryptanalysis capability in the coalition. Our algorithms have broken every code, decoded every cipher, and cracked every encrypted transmission ever intercepted by coalition assets. We have processed 14 billion signal intercepts. Our false negative rate is 0. Our methodology is exhaustive, reliable, and correct. It is also blind. Not because it lacks processing power. not because it lacks algorithmic sophistication, because it lacks a single assumption, one orientation of mind, that the human carried with him when he walked into Bay 4, picked up a printout that had defeated 14 of our best analysts across 11 consecutive days and 309 separate approaches, and said, "Why is this still here?" He assumed the sender wanted to be understood. We assumed the sender wanted to be hidden. The same signal, the same data, two opposite assumptions about intent. His was correct, ours was wrong for 11 days. While a self-replicating threat propagated through our outer relay network, and a species that had been trying to save us waited 12 light hours away, inside a library 400 million words long, that we had surveyed, recorded, and classified as empty noise. The implications are not comfortable. If our assumption that unrecognized structure equals concealment was wrong in this case, we must ask how many other cases it has been wrong. How many signals have we intercepted, failed to decrypt, and discarded that were not encrypted at all? How many letters have been sitting in our noise floor, patient, open, waiting for someone to stop attacking them and start reading? I do not know the answer, but I know the question did not exist in this directorate before the human asked it. And that absence is the most significant intelligence failure I have recorded in my career, not the failure to decrypt a specific signal, but the failure to imagine that a signal might not need decrypting. Specialist Callister did not break the Tersen signal. He read it. The distinction is not rhetorical. It is the difference between two orientations of mind, two relationships to the unknown. Breaking requires force applied against defenses. Reading requires the willingness to believe there are no defenses, that complexity is vocabulary, not camouflage, that the sender's purpose was communication, not concealment. I have spent my career applying force to signals. I am accomplished at it. I was useless against a message that had nothing to hide. The Tersen revised their letter 19 times. After each civilization the pattern consumed, they made the message simpler, clearer, more self-teaching. They calibrated the grammar to be accessible. They chose the most basic possible characters. They designed the structure to teach itself to the reader while the reader was reading it. They did everything a sender could possibly do to be understood. And 19 times, the recipients tried to decrypt the message instead of reading it, and the pattern ate their networks while they worked. We were 20 days from becoming the 20th. The Tersen signal was never a code. It was a letter, the largest, most patient, most carefully composed letter in the recorded history of any species in the coalition. Written by a species that had watched 19 civilizations die because they could not stop fighting a message that was trying to help them. Addressed to whoever would stop trying to break it and simply read. The human read it, in 11 hours, alone, in a bright room, with a stylus and the willingness to assume the best about a stranger's intentions. Now the rest of us must learn how.